Happy Thursday, y'all. So, I want to talk a little bit about the passage that we read yesterday from First Corinthians chapter 1. And just in Paul's very, very plain language, where he tells us again that the cross and God's salvation doesn't really make sense, in the natural. And that he would use the cross and Jesus' death and resurrection to create a family, really, to finish or fulfill his family. And it says, I want to connect this one, 1 Corinthians 1:23. It says, we preach Christ the Messiah crucified, preaching which to the Jews is a scandal and an offensive stumbling block that springs up a snare or trap. And do you remember last week or the week before we were talking about 2 Corinthians 10:5, and it said those casting down those imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself. Well, this thought, this reasoning, it says that preaching, which to the Jews is a scandal and an offensive stumbling block, that's what that is, a high thing. That the Jews would have their law so held in esteem that they could not accept what Jesus had come and done. That he was the Messiah, Yeshua, that they had long waited for. But their natural minds could not accept, they just could not accept it. I mean, and we've talked about several times in our lives, I've been reading through the book of Mark, and I mean, Jesus, the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders, you would think that those who knew the law and were in the law would be so excited that Yeshua had come, that the Messiah, the anointed one, was here who would fulfill the law, that they would not have to keep 603 laws. But instead, the religious leaders were so ingrained in tradition, and they had found their importance in keeping the law, and that they had position and power, so they thought, clean on the outside, filthy on the inside. This was a barrier for them. They could not accept Jesus. And again, this helmet of salvation that we must wear, that it be tightly around our heads, our minds, to remind us that it's not in and of ourselves, but it is in Christ. Everything for the believer is in Christ. And then to the Gentiles, it is absurd and utterly unphilosophical nonsense. And I think that is what really gives us the picture of culture at this time. The philosophical. And Paul says in Romans chapter 1, I want to mark my place here so don't forget it, or I don't lose it, but in Romans chapter 1, let's see, verse 14, Paul says, both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, to the cultured and the uncultured, both to the wise and the foolish, I have an obligation to discharge and a duty to perform and a debt to pay. So for my part, I am willing and eagerly ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, the good news of Christ, for it is God's power working unto salvation, for deliverance from eternal death to everyone who believes, with a personal trust and a confident surrender and a firm reliance. Paul said, I am not ashamed of the gospel. The Passion Translation says, I refuse to be ashamed of sharing the wonderful message of God's liberating power unleashed in us through Christ. For I am thrilled to preach that everyone who believes is saved. Liberating power. That's part of the importance of that helmet of salvation. That we who are in Christ Jesus are free. We are no longer bound by those things which would hold us captive in the natural. There is now nothing under heaven, nothing in the earth that is outside the restorative power of Jesus Christ and his finished work at the cross and resurrection. The cross is a very, very powerful place, a place where sin was dealt with. But Jesus did not stay on the cross, nor did he stay in the tomb. And because he is alive, because of his resurrection, we can now walk in that salvation. We can walk in that deliverance. We can walk in that defense. And I said earlier in the week that we must have a renewed mind to it. Yes, we are saved, but we must train ourselves to think saved. I've used this example in teaching in years past, but however old you are, think about that. Think about how old you are. And think about how many years you have done things a certain way. Okay. How easy would it be for you to change that? Think of something that you do and have done the same way for the longest period of time. How easy would it be for you to change doing that? You would have to retrain yourself, right? You would have to reteach yourself how to do this task. In the very same way, we have to teach ourselves how to live in the salvation Jesus Christ provided. Thankfully, we are well able to do that. All right, we will pick up here tomorrow. I'll see you then. Bye, y'all.